Hey, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. You're in Italy, is that right?
I'm in Italy. Yes, yeah. I'm in Italy. We are lucky in the sense that we found a little studio here near Lago Maggiore. We go in the summer, and now it's Easter vacations at the moment. So we
Ah,
spend the
okay.
time here, and there's a little studio place to work for me.
What end of Italy is that?
That's sort of like the northwest of Italy. So you've got
Northwest,
the
near Pisa or
northwest, yeah.
Verona? Northwest.
Like Milano is the next major city. So Lago Maggiore actually is sort of in between Milano, which is a little bit closer, and Turin.
Oh, okay. Yeah, lovely. It's a lovely part of the world.
Yeah, yeah, it's lovely. Really close to the Swiss border.
Ah, okay. Do you do
So
you drive down or do
partner.
you fly down?
No, we drive down. We drive down. I
Ah,
mean,
nice.
you
Yeah.
know, I'm sort of not a big fan of flying, and with the family, it's better anyways because we always have tons of stuff, and I bring some work stuff. And, yeah.
Very good. Okay, if you're listening, I am talking to Ruprecht von Kaufmann in Italy. Um, but you're mostly in Berlin, aren't you?
Yes, I'm mostly in Berlin. Yeah, yeah.
Mostly in Berlin, but we've caught him in Italy. And just to give you a time context for today, today is Wednesday, the 13th of April, 2021. So, for someone listening who hasn't seen your work, how would you describe your paintings?
Oh dear. Man, to be quite honest, I loathe that question because it's so hard to describe paintings. Um, when I was living in New York still, I was subscribing to the New Yorker, and they always have like this little. In the beginning, they have a section where they have little super short descriptions of exhibitions that you can see around town. And I
Yeah.
found that every single time I read one that got me really interested and I went to see the show, they looked nothing like I had imagined it to look like. So if I describe my paintings, I'm sure that it will conjure completely diverse pictures in people's heads. Um, I mean, they're rather large-scaled figurative works. Um, Figures always play a very central role in my paintings, but they're not, in a sense, portrait paintings, and all the figures are invented figures. They're more, um, for lack of a better word, stereotypes of particular people, or the feeling that people trigger in me that I try to capture in the figures. And they sort of skirt a little bit between, right, the border of realism and abstraction, I would say. So they're less realistic than a lot of my fellow realist painters' paintings.
Yeah. That's pretty good. I think that's a pretty good description. I don't think people would be disappointed if they read that and went to the show.
No, I didn't say I was disappointed, but yeah. It just, yeah, I was trying to be so vague that you can, it fits the painting, but I don't think you really come up with a wrong idea of what they're like.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a difficult question.
Well, look, I've got plenty more of them, all right?
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. Bring him
But
on.
I didn't come up with them. They all came in from social media. So yeah, let's get into the social media ones then. This is from Paul T. Levin on Twitter, and he says, "No specific questions. Just make it 6 hour. Just make it a 6 hour conversation like the one with Nicholas Uribe." Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
a good
We'll
one.
we'll try and do that, Paul. Seriously though, could he talk about his training and evolution as a painter and his comic book heroes?
Right. So let's start with the comic book heroes because I was always a kid who loved drawing. Since my earliest memories was set somewhere with some drawing utensils and did sketches and drawings. And it seriously never occurred to me that that ever could be anything that I would do for a job or profession, right? It was more something like a trick you did in school to entertain classmates and have a laugh and pass the time and sort of make sense of the world for me. Um, and I loved reading comic books, but in Europe, like I don't know, like if that's true for Ireland or the English speaking world as much, but in Germany at the time, we were reading mostly French and Belgian comics. So like my biggest comic book heroes are Franquin and Hergé. So the guy who did Tintin and
Okay.
Spirou and Fantasio. Um, Especially he did Franquin. He did one comic book that's called Les Idées Noires, which is just, if you can get your hands on it, it's amazing. I mean, the story behind it is pretty sad because the guy drew the comic book just before he really dropped into very bad, deep depression. And it sort of shows like it's very dark humor,
Right.
very sinister jokes, but very poignant and very on the spot. It's a brilliant comic book, and but the style of drawing is very very different from American style comic books. I find like the typical superhero comic books, which I only discovered for real when I moved to the States to study. Yeah, which might be a good segue to get to the whole studying thing. So I didn't, as I said, like I didn't imagine it could ever be anything that you do for a job or for a living. And then my dad actually talked me into looking into doing something with applied artsism. And so I discovered this school in Switzerland that was called Art Center of Design. And it used to be a sister school of the one in California that they had to shut down a few years back. And I started studying graphic designs there. And, it only goes to show how really horribly naive I was. I figured, I loved illustrations like you find in the New Yorker and things like that. And I always thought, graphic designers are the same kind of guys who do the drawings. Well, of course, like I discovered that is nothing like it, that graphic design has to do mostly with type and letters. And that didn't interest me much at all. But then I discovered there was a sister school in California, and they were offering an illustration department. And I'm like, oh yeah, like that's much more like what I want to do. So I kind of, in the spur of the moment, reapplied, got admitted, had a week to pack and moved to the States. And I was completely unprepared for what Los Angeles would be like. Everybody told me, "Oh yeah, you need to get a car, man." Um, what are you talking about? I'm going to use public transport. I'm not going to buy a car or something. And I came to LA, and of course, then at least at the time, there was zero public transport except for a few buses here and there. Yeah, and then I started studying illustration. Really quickly discovered that illustration wasn't my thing either because I always painted and drew things that had nothing to do with the assignments. And lucky for me, there were like a lot of figurative painters teaching at Art Center at the time who then encouraged me and said, like, yeah, Rup, like you're not doing the assignments anyway, so why don't you do your own paintings and just, go with that because that seems to be what you're good at anyway. So that's how, through a slippery slope theory, I got into painting really.
It's lovely though. Like there's a sort of magical naivety about it. Like you were sort of taken care of, even though you thought you were doing one thing and one thing led to another.
True, and there was like a certain inevitability about it as well. which, yeah, I don't know, like sometimes it seems life just kind of pushes you into onto the roads that are best for you, it seems. Or maybe it's just a justification in retrospect. I'm not quite entirely sure about that.
Yeah. Well, either
Um,
works.
but I think, to be quite honest, that's the beauty about being young, right? Or younger than I'm now. Um, that you take these decisions on the spur. You don't think about it much, and you're like, "Oh yeah, like that sounds great. I'm going to move to LA and study art. Fantastic!" And you just do it, and you don't think about all the stuff that might happen, or how it might be difficult or complicated. You just hop on an airplane, and the next moment you're there, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I'm at the airport, and I have no clue where to go, but I'll figure it
Yeah.
out from here."
Yeah. 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 Yep. Totally relate to that. Thinking back on, like, when I think back to things I did when I was much younger, it's slightly traumatic. When I think about it, like now, back then I got through, but now if I was to do the same thing, I was like, oh. So did you do further study then in America?
No, really, I just did my BFA, my bachelor's degree, and I don't know, like it didn't seem like right to do a master's. I figured, um, I'm a strong believer in learning by doing, and I figured, okay, like I'm just gonna keep plowing along and do my paintings and try to improve them as much as I can. And um, they have evolved a lot since, and I'm not quite sure that they would have necessarily evolved better or quicker or whatever through a master's.
Yeah. So you were able to change your, like you started off in illustration, but you were able to change to fine art painting then, were you?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, like in the beginning, I wanted to do both. I had this just degree in illustration and theoretically knew how to do that stuff. And just after graduation, I sort of did. I mean, at the time, you still sent out postcards, right? Like you got like 1,000 postcards printed, and you bought like a mailing list, and then you sent postcards to editors all around the country to apply
Right.
for illustration jobs. It seems so antiquated at this point now. It's not that long ago. But anyways, that's how you did it. And so send out my postcards and got a couple of illustration jobs. But you know, luckily for me, like the paintings caught on much quicker than my illustration work, and I got a show here or there, like first in the beginning group shows, then my first solo shows. Had bad experiences with galleries, kind of paid my dues, and it went from there. And it was essentially the same way about going to study in America. I didn't plan on sticking around, just thought, okay, I go for 3 years study and then I go back to Europe and become an artist there or whatever I was thinking. I don't think I wasn't thinking anything. But of course, then also was hopelessly naive because you obviously while you study, you make most of your connections that you need later in your career.
Mm.
So, I stuck around in the beginning, just, okay, I'm going to do this one more exhibition and then I'll leave. And, in the end, I was there for almost 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
Way too long.
Really? Why?
No, no, I mean, like, I'm just joking. It was a lovely, lovely place. And I met really wonderful people there, and it was one of the most influential times in my life. But it was sort of sad, like when I finally decided to leave, and there were reasons for that. But it was just a time when, September 11th had happened, and I lived at the time in New York, and I actually did see the towers collapse sitting on the roof of our house in Brooklyn, where we were living at the time. And then listening to all the war talk, all of a sudden coming out of America, and Bush all of a sudden from a complete dope evolving into this national hero, it all seemed sort of sad. And yeah, and then decided, okay, that's also maybe a good time to pack your bags and leave and go for a new beginning in Europe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Irwin Cruz on Twitter says, any artists that influenced your recent body of work?
Um, that's also a difficult question to answer because I s- I nick stuff here and there and everywhere. I'm a big believer in stealing things. Well, not really stealing things. It's sort of like the remix or being letting yourself being influenced, and sometimes it's like the most absurd things. Some kind of advertising illustration somewhere, or just one frame in a comic book, or the other day I was watching some kind of I think it was Downton Abbey or something, and there was just this one shot that was so beautiful that I stopped my video and did a screenshot of it just to remember like that shot. And the painting in the end had nothing to do with this shot. It was just something that I took as an inspiration or a starting point. And there's also countless artists, just sometimes abstract artists looking at textures on painting. Because I'm a big fan of texture. I love textures in paintings and seeing how they create textures, all the way to figurative artists where I wish I could paint as well as them. Yeah.
You're doing all right, Ruprecht. You're doing okay.
Yeah, I'm doing okay with my thing now.
Keep at it. I think you're going to get there. Um,
I
Daniel
will. I'm believing it.
Daniel Arthur in Portugal says, top three contemporary artists.
Top three contemporary artists. I think. Oh, I have to say Gerhard Richter actually figures as one of mine, which is sort of very not innovative or unexpected. But I think he is just a very, very good painter, and and you have to give it to him that in the conditions or like the art world that we have, he could survive with essentially doing three different styles at least, which I think is a feat in itself. Um,
Do you mean
Man,
that it's hard to you like at the sort of end of the market that he's at, that you pretty much have to do one thing, and if you try and do something else, it's very difficult. Is that what you mean?
I th- exactly, yeah. And I think that to be quite honest, I'm not sure Gerhard Richter would make it in today's art world because it has become so much more commercial, and galleries expect artists to produce artwork that looks exactly like it has 10 years ago. And
Okay.
if I mean, if I went to any of my galleries and say like, "Hey guys, I've got an abstract show here for you. What do you think?" They'd be, "You're completely insane."
Wow.
And I mean, really, this did really happen to me. I was working at the time with this gallery in New York, and I'm not going to mention their name because I don't want to defame them or anything. But like I had just moved back to Germany, and I was working on this series where that was influenced by Goya. Like when I was younger, and I've never seen like a painting of Goya's and especially not the black paintings. Like I always kind of had a very different picture of what the black paintings should look like, and so I decided, okay, I'm going to do the black paintings how I imagined they would look like, more or less. And I sent like first sketches or first drawings to my New York gallery, and they were very different paintings, right? Like they were super dark, and there were no backgrounds. The backgrounds were just black and figures kind of like barely coming out of this black muck. And they're super dark and brooding paintings, I admit. But, my New York gallerist at the time, we're talking on the phone and she's like, Ruprecht, I need to talk to you seriously. Are you going schizophrenic? So she gave me this whole spiel about, that just didn't fly, changing
Wow.
the painting style like
So
that.
did you change your style or change your gallery?
I changed my gallery, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Thomas Wharton in West Virginia, a longtime friend of the podcast, says, "Do other art forms influence your work?" Well, you kind of answered that, but anything triggered by that question?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, hugely, hugely. I mean, I draw almost most of my inspiration from books. I'm a huge reading addict, or now audiobook addict. It's been like a weird odd switch in my studio from listening to music all the time and in my breaks, reading, to listening to audiobooks or podcasts all the time, and then in my breaks, um, making music. So the roles have been reversed, but like if I draw a lot of my inspiration from music, from books, from the lyrics in songs, especially. Love lyrics.
Okay. And is it wide ranging, or do you have certain musicians that are a good, mine for you?
Well, I mean, like one of my all-time favorites is Tom Waits,
Yeah.
just because the moods he creates in his songs, and the lyrics is they, for example, are very big inspiration for me because they're wonderful in creating a mood without, or at least I barely ever can figure out what the song is really about,
Yeah,
but with a
yeah.
lot of like his strongest songs. But that makes the songs really fascinating for me. That
Yeah.
they they manage to feel true without you even knowing what they're really, which is amazing. And I think that even though that sounds like a contradiction, I think it's something that's super important in art, that it feels like it sounds true with how you experience life, even though
Yeah.
you don't know what it's exactly about. And we don't know what life is exactly about.
Yeah. Yeah. He always strikes me as, or his music always strikes me as like having a really good friend that you love a lot who's gone through a really hard time.
Yeah, true. Yeah, yeah. But see, I think that's also like a very important thing because I think that's one big role that art plays in people's lives. Ideally, that it is that friend in hard times. And there's like in Germany, there's at least a saying like that: shared joy is double joy, and shared sorrow is half sorrow.
No, that's
And I
nice.
think
Yeah.
there's something very true about that. And there's a reason why, especially when we feel oftentimes down in our life, we love to listen to tragic, sad songs because or at least I do. Maybe you shouldn't um, assume that other people do as well. But I think it helps because you feel that there's like a kindred spirit who's also gone through hard times and they've pulled through. They've made this beautiful song about it. So why should you pull through? You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 Um, Leland Purvis on Twitter says, how much prep work is done, sketches, color studies, etc., before starting a piece? Is there a lot of iterative change that happens while a work is in progress?" And Randall Graham on Patreon, thanks for the tea, Randall, says, "Hi, John, love RVK's art." It was so funny when people started referring to you as RVK. Makes you sound like I don't know, a rapper or something. Anyway,
Yeah,
hi,
yeah, that'd be
John.
cool. My son would love that.
Love RVK's art. His work creates such a unique world. Does he meditate, brainstorm, or plan out a particular vision to come up with his ideas, or do paintings evolve while he's working on them? Thanks for all the great interviews, Randall. You're welcome, Randall. So, yeah, both those questions are kind of the same thing. That's why I put them together.
Yeah.
How does it all start?
So how does it all start? It that as well has changed a little bit over the years. So since, and maybe I should mention that because not all of the people listening might know that I'm not using any reference pictures or models or anything. Like my paintings are complete inventions. So they're spaces that happen in my head. They're people that happen in my head, and I just paint them. And when I started out with that technique, which I've done pretty much right from the get-go, and I can get to a little anecdote why that was. I realized that I needed a lot of prep work to save me from, reworking and reworking and reworking paintings on the canvas, to get things right, to make it believable and make spaces feel believable and work color schemes out. So I used to do a lot of prep work. So for my up to about 2012, I'd say most of my work, there's like a corresponding gouache study. And I love working with gouache because I love drawing with a brush. And so you can more or less do a drawing, but incorporate values, colors while you're doing it. And at the same time, gouache is super easy to change. If you mess something up, either you just throw away the paper and do a new study, or you just take a brush loaded with water and mush it all up and start over. And I love that spontaneity and that ease that comes with that. But a little later, kind of with the point when I started working on linoleum, I stopped that a little bit to make it more interesting for me, or maybe I felt that I had gotten good enough to improvise a little bit on the fly more. So now I do mostly compositional studies. I do lots of studies, just loose drawings, colored pencil drawings of how I think the figures should look like, because I think the poses of figures are enormously important. We read so much through how people move or are positioned in a painting. And then I essentially start, and oftentimes I will use the linoleum that I paint on, the color of the linoleum, as an inspiration point to find interesting color schemes. So at the moment, for example, I've bought one that is, how did my studio assistant call that? He said, "Oh yeah, like it looks like comic book vomit." So, yeah, so seeing what I can do with comic book vomit color and how I can turn that into something beautiful.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's good. You should try it someday.
Which comic book vomit or painting with that color? Both, yeah. Paul T. Levin again says, do your paintings typically suggest stories, situations, and relationships that are fleshed out in your head? Or are they more suggestive, metaphorical, and their meaning subconscious?
Probably more the later, because I'm not really trying to go for particular situations or really create a narrative. I'm more trying to create a feeling of a situation. So then what I'm really hoping for is that they will trigger emotions in the people that are looking at the paintings, and they will make them feel a certain way, and will make them feel a little bit uneasy. And I'm always looking for the point of view of, I'm like, my little pet theory is that the world as we look at it now only makes sense because we've got certain paradigms that we apply to it, and that like a frame that we give the world within which we say like, okay, this is what makes sense and is reasonable behavior, and everything out of that frame is insanity, right? And but that frame can be changed, and it has changed a lot over human history. So, like there was a time when people thought it was completely normal owning another human being. And now, at least, fortunately, a majority of us will agree that that's an insane idea. And I always like to push in my paintings that frame a little bit and shift it a little bit so that the viewer will get the sense, oh yeah, like things that we think are completely normal now, they're kind of insane, a lot of them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't know if
Yes.
that was clear. So that's
S-
essentially what I'm going for.
Yeah. How do you navigate through that though? Because from the viewer's point of view, they see the painting, they have a reaction. I, what leads you in that process for you? Are you with that feeling as you paint all the time, and that's your kind of guiding star, if you like, or are you? Is there more like you're more consciously okay? If I put this here, that will cause this emotion, and if I put that over there, and that, like what? How do you
Oh,
orchestrate it?
yeah. Yeah, no, no, like no, I'm a very intuitive painter, I would say. And it's more that like in retrospect, after I've done studies or when I'm like the first layout of the painting, I'm kind of readjusting things to make them more interesting compositorially. And ideally, I think you have these paintings where the the concept of the painting and the perspectives used in the paintings or the composition used in the painting overlap and kind of reinforce each other perfectly, or as perfect as you can get, because I don't think there's any such thing as perfection, really. So,
Yeah.
example, I painted this painting based on Otto Dix, and then I painted all kinds of people on the Berlin nightlife streets, and they are missing documents of Berlin 20s, and I figured, okay, like we're now in the 2020s. Do you still hear me?
Yes. You broke up a little bit, but I think I got it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, and some eerie similarities, and I'm going to set out 19 people today and see how would people be different and how would paintings have to be different. And there's one painting of like a punk, like a street punk in a street corner. But the way he's positioned in the painting, he's in the very top of a pretty large painting that's 2 meters tall, and when it hangs on the wall, he's actually above your head, looking up at you or down at you, right? So both happens. Like you, as the viewer, stand there, and if you buy into the perspective of the painting, you're looking down at the street punk, but in reality, he's above your head, looking down at you
Yes.
in the gallery space. See what I mean?
Yep.
And for me, that was very important because I think that's exactly what happens, right? Like there's disdain a little bit on both sides, and a little bit of misunderstanding. We as, the good law-abiding people, let's put it that way, walking past them and saying like, oh yeah, like you bum and you punk, whatever. And he looking up at us and saying like, oh yeah, like you poor suckers in a hamster wheel, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I mean about overlap between content and composition. And that's
Yeah.
fun when that actually succeeds and happens.
Yeah.
But it was something that was really started very intuitively and then only later was fleshed out more concretely.
Yeah. And is that what you're going for, to make people feel upset? Is that the main thing, or is it different paintings, different things?
It's different paintings, different things, but I think the worst thing that can happen is people walking by a painting, shrugging their shoulders and moving on, right? I'd much rather have people being like, oh man, like I can't take that painting. Like I can't look at this. right? Like, because it's it's at least engaging them and makes them engage with art, even if that is a negative reaction. I think it's better than no reaction at all.
Yeah, yeah. And why I if I understand what you were saying, you're trying to highlight that you're trying to sort of go the social norms that we have now, they're just normal because we say they're normal. They're not actually normal. They're quite some of them are quite crazy. Is there a reason why you want to point that out to people?
Isn't that reason enough already? I mean, to kind of remind yourself that like our behavior is to a large degree insane. And actually, in the last couple of years, the the environmental crisis has become something that I've gotten very concerned and very interested in. So that plays a big role. That I don't understand, like how we all still carelessly keep plowing down a road that we know will lead to our self-destruction. I mean, that really seems absurd to me, and I wonder how later generations will judge that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Katie Pearson on Instagram says, "Where does the source for the energy come from, and how reflective of emotions is it?" Sorry, imagery, not energy.
Okay, so where does the
Yeah,
source of the imagery come from?
yeah, and how reflective of emotions is it?
You know what? Like, that's another really hard one to answer because the sources are so varied, and sometimes it's just, I will walk down the street and all of a sudden I have like this image of a person in a certain position in my head, or like in a normal position but in a weird place, right? And it just is an image that's sort of frozen on into the inside of my brain and doesn't let me move on. And then I start sketching it. And as I'm sketching it, I'm thinking about, okay, like what is it about this that made me feel attracted to it, about this position, about the scene, about the way people are interacting. Um, and then, I try to, because there's so many choices obviously associated with it, right? Like you can have just somebody sitting on a chair, but then the way the body is being held, are the legs crossed, are the legs not crossed? Do they do the George W. seat with like their legs splayed wide open and their hand in their crutch, or are they doing the Angela Merkel kind of seating position? Like, what are they doing with their hands? Like, where do they look? What do they wear? What kind of room is it? What kind of chair is it? All these kind of questions, it becomes super interesting to ask because the answer to all these really change a lot how the painting feels. And that's sort of how I go along. Like, it's more that yeah, the idea seems very concrete in my head, but it's more concrete in the sense of that feeling that I'm looking for. And then I'm going out drawing, following, trying to keep shifting and changing the drawing until I find exactly that it feels the way I think it should feel.
Yeah, yeah. Are you like very intuitive outside of painting, or is it all just for painting?
Um, I think it's mainly for painting.
Yeah. Okay.
Otherwise, I'm a very, very organized, straightforward person, and probably like, yeah, not very good in interaction with other people. Not at least not intuitively.
Okay. Ken Cunningham on Patreon. Thanks for the tea, Ken. Says, "Hey, John, thanks so much for doing a podcast with RVK."
There we go
Uh,
again.
there we go again. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of his work. So very excited about this. Ruprecht, your pieces seem so intentional from a compositional and narrative standpoint. Could you talk about the planning and design of your paintings? So you've talked about it a bit, but is anything triggered from that question?
Yeah, just in a sense that I think, it's kind of bizarre. So I feel that the expectation towards painters these days a lot that intuition is a bad thing, right? It feels like feely wishy-washy, not good. And art should be about hardcore concept, and you have a concept and you kind of pull it through, right? Like that is sort of like the something that painters often struggle with. That painting to a large degree is intuitive, but I think it's a very hard to describe mixture, at least for people who don't paint themselves, between intuition and very clear thinking. And to me, like the biggest part of my preparation is actually trying to get myself into a frame of mind where I'm feeling I'm sort of in the zone, I'm in the flow, right? Where all of a sudden like the borders between thinking and planning and intuition completely melt. And the only time I experienced that outside from painting is was like in LA when I was still living in LA. I was going mountain biking a lot, and you go down these crazy steep single track trails, and you just flying down these single track trails, and all of a sudden there's like rocks and stuff, and I found that if you try to consciously think, what should I do? Should I lift my front tire? Like you're always too late, and you'll mess it up and you wipe out and hurt yourself. But if you allowed yourself, your brain to just take over without you trying to steer what your brain should be doing, you all of a sudden get into this amazing state of where everything seems in control, even though you completely release control. And I think that's the best I can describe that state between trying to be very concrete and definite and decisive about what you're doing, but at the same time, it's very intuitive and free flowing.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Do you find that you have to be in motion for that? Like just the way you describe that, it sounds like, I don't know from my own experience of being in flow, it's very hard to do it when you're not moving. Like to sort of sit in a chair and try and get into a flow state is much harder than to be in activity. It sort of comes with activity, in my experience. What about you?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Yeah. So, sports or, at least taking the dog for a walk is a very big part of my daily routine because it does, you know, I love to do sports just before I go to the studio, where you're already thinking about what you're going to do in the studio, but you're moving and you're in motion, and your brain is kind of cooking on the back burner, but you're kind of distracted by other things still.
Yeah.
And also, like while I paint, I rarely sit while I paint. I'm usually standing and moving and stepping back, moving forward, stepping to the mirror, kind of doing kind of weird gymnastics, trying to look at the painting upside down and all that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty much on my feet all day. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it has something to do with motion, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the cliche of, getting the brainwave in the shower.
Yeah, like the shower doesn't do it for me. Like it seems like a little bit too little movement, but yeah, essentially.
Well, I think for me anyway, I think the shower thing is that you can't do anything about it. It's almost like that turns on something in my brain. It's like the one place I cannot write it down or draw it or whatever
True.
it's like, oh, okay, now let's. It's like it disengages some part, and then the ideas flow. Um, Leland Purvis again on Twitter says, "How do you decide when to try for a real description of a thing / element versus when to settle for just a visual symbol of it?"
So I think in my paintings, there is no real difference because oftentimes I try to go for let's take a chair. Like oftentimes when I have a chair in my painting, I put a lot of thought into it, how to paint that chair, that it is a particular chair and not just a lazy shorthand, but still general enough to feel just like a chair and not, it's an Eames chair or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that again, it's sort of like this fine line in between, because what is also very important for me is that I feel the painting should be concrete enough to draw people in and make them feel that there's like a definite concrete situation going on, but at the same time open enough that they can pour their own memories and their own world into it and recognize their own world in it. So and that's also why I'm usually shying away from real portrait painting, because that sort of precludes that somebody, I mean, then a painting becomes a painting about a person that I know that has been painted. But if it's not really a portrait, and also the figure is sort of on the verge of being, you can recognize what type of person it is, but it's not like a concrete, that particular person, then it's also could be a type of person that you know in your life, and it's not about the person I know in my life. And that I think is much more interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things I really like about your paintings is that um, they sort of feel like 90% real and 10% wonky, or 10% like jarring, because what you're saying, like the chair, but then there'll be some part of the chair that's almost dreamlike, or just jars. Not that it's painted wrong or anything like that. I don't mean that, but it's like bent in a strange way that just adds this kind of strange kind of subconscious feeling to the whole thing of like that's sort of real, but there's something about it that's disturbing.
Yeah, but I think wonky is actually a good word, because that's another thing that I find very interesting about inventing scenery is that at some point I realized perspective, for example, is very malleable. It's like as long as you get close enough to mimicking the rules of perspective that the viewer buys into it, you can bend and contort things to a quite large degree to make them fit with like what you want to do compositionally and what you want to with the paintings, where you want the painting to go, right? And that's really fascinating to me, and I love, obviously, like once you start exploring that, it's becomes really fun to push that and see like how far can you push people before that realism breaks. And I think that is also one interesting thing, that it's something in a painting doesn't look realistic because I painted it realistically, but it's just because marks that are made on the canvas match with your expectations of what something should be looking like, that you've recognized from your own life and your own experience. And yet again, there is a lot of room for playfulness and distortion and pushing that
Yeah.
up to a point.
Yeah, I find it particularly, or I find it particularly with, you're a great man for cutting people's heads off, which is
Yeah,
really
yeah.
shocking. It's almost like like when you hand the camera to your mother and say, take the picture, and then you get it back and, all the heads are cut off and the legs are cut off. It's a bit like that in a painting way. And the initial reaction, my reaction is always like, hang on a minute, where's but then you kind of go, yeah, but that actually works. What prompted me to say that was when you're talking about why it's not portraiture and why you're not going for a likeness. You're going for a familiarity. Like I kind of recognize that person. And even though I can't see their head, my brain fills it in really easily.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And that's partly the reason why a lot of times the heads go missing. Partly also because I love taking the heads off because we perceive ourselves as human beings also as rational creatures. We love to think about ourselves as rational creatures that can control the world and that are masters of the world. And especially people who are prone to conspiracy theories are even more convinced that we have everything under control and everything is manipulated and controlled. But I think in the reality of it is that we're not. We're completely steered by instinct and by irrational reactions and interpretations of situations and snap decisions that are taken in the spur of the moment. I mean, there's this beautiful, I love social sciences and experiments that scientists do. And has been this one experiment where they actually are trying to look into people's behaviors ordering food in a restaurant. And what is really fascinating that they found, like when people had picked a certain dish from the menu, and the person before them ordered the same dish, they changed their mind and ordered something else because they didn't want to look like they were imitating the one before them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's completely irrational behavior, isn't it? If you feel like having that dish, why should you change your order just because somebody else is having the same dish? It doesn't make sense. But still, we completely go for that. And I mean, like the whole advertising industry lives off that, right? Like that they sell us things or make us believe that we want things that we didn't know we needed or wanted before they told us that we did.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you not think that's part of growth? Meaning, as you grow, you go through a period of thinking you're the center of everything and that you're in charge of everything. And then as you grow in self-knowledge, you start to see your foibles and you start to see, you gain more self-knowledge and you can kind of see how driven you are by unconscious urges and forces within you. And you sort of grow into being more at peace with what you may not have been at peace with before, like when you were desperately trying to feel like you were in charge of everything.
Well, I mean, to be quite honest, I never felt really in charge of many things personally, but again, that's my fault. No, I mean, like your whole sentence is based on the assumption that you're talking about a human being that is enlightened enough to think that much about themselves and what they're doing. But I think, to be quite honest, there's plenty of people who don't bother thinking that much about what they do and what life means, that they never get to that point of that self-acknowledgement,
True.
honestly.
True.
I mean, I'm sorry if that sounds like super arrogant and mean-spirited, but yeah.
Well, I think of it more in like just in as much as I'm not in control of anything, and when you're talking about climate crisis and all that kind of thing, in many ways it does feel like we're in an out of control train. So it's more, I think like that because it's kind of hopeful, and that makes me feel better. whether it's true or not, that as a group, we will begin to, get past this, early stage of thinking we can control everything and begin to see our own weakness. And, like the pandemic was a good example of that, of kind of going, no, you're not in charge. It'll be so easy for us all to be wiped out, it'll take very little. And there was a certain amount of awakening went on then, and then everybody went back to business. But there'll be other things, I think. I think that's
true.
why I think of it like that,
Yeah, it's true, and I think it's a very good survival tactic. And it would be, I think, an interesting discussion for another day whether that is rational or irrational behavior, right? Because you're sort of telling yourself a lie of something that you at least can't be really certain that it is reality, right? Like you bending reality to your wishes to help you feel better.
Oh yeah, but absolutely. But I'm very consciously doing that
Yeah, I know.
because there's so much that's unknown and unprovable that well, what I do have control over is how I feel, like my own kind of mental health.
Absolutely, and I think it's also very interesting that um, these mental tricks of telling yourself stories become much more important in life as you go on, and don't only apply to that. Like to come back to art, for example, like I've discovered at some point that I'm really crap at being at openings, because you always look at your paintings and you, like as I said, like I don't believe that there is anything perfect ever, right? So like I always used to be on openings, standing there looking at my paintings, going in my head still, oh yeah, like could that have been better? Or like what would have happened if I had taken that decision like a little earlier to go another road, and all these kind of questions, right? But for somebody visiting your exhibition, talking to you on your opening, that feels just like insecurity about your own work. And so eventually I got to the point that I told myself, okay, like I need to be consciously schizophrenic, like my New York gallerist suggested, and be a different person for an opening that I am in the studio. And I consciously try to leave the artist self behind when I go to an opening, and then just tell myself beforehand, yeah, you're just a salesman. Like you didn't paint these paintings, somebody else's paintings. You just need to sell them.
Does it work? Do you feel better at the openings?
Yeah, I feel better at the openings actually, because it's sort of like I'm managed to distance myself from my paintings better.
Yeah. Well, good for you. Tanya Rivelis in Portugal, former podcast guest, episode 223. If you're looking for it, Tanya's also helping me with the NFTs on the catch-up episodes. That's episode 228. Says, "Yay, my favorite contemporary artist. Could you please ask Ruprecht if he paints from life models, or is it all imagination?" Okay, well, you kind of answered that already. Anything else you want to say about that?
Well, thank you for the favorite artist.
Well, actually, it's prompted
Very
me to
kind thing
ask
to
you
say.
ask you a question. You must have a very, I wouldn't say, do you have a photographic memory, or you must have a very strong visual memory for things that informs to be able to paint from imagination? Because I know if I tried to paint a chair from imagination, I don't think I would be able to pull it off the way you do. In fact, I know I wouldn't be able to.
Um, I think it's like a process that you like where you get stronger at. But what I find very interesting about doing stuff from the imagination, and sometimes I'm jokingly saying like I'm just too stupid and I don't have enough fantasy and creativity to use photographs, because as soon as you give me a photograph, I'll just copy the damn thing, and that really is no good. But when you try to paint something from the imagination, like it forces you to really ask yourself the question: what is it actually that makes this interesting? like what was beautiful about how the light was striking, I don't know, like how a candle kind of glows from the inside out, and like how the lights and the colors move there, and you make little mental notes, and I think I've got like a little scrapbook of these mental notes in my head that I refer to.
And what do you do when you get stuck? Like, I'm just thinking of in my own terms. Like, if I was trying to paint a chair and I got stuck and I just couldn't get it, it would be really hard for me not to go and look at a chair or look at a similar chair that to what I was trying to paint, just to kind of go, oh yeah, I haven't looked at that chair enough, obviously, because I don't have it in there.
Mm. Well, I mean, it does happen very rarely, every now and then, that then there's something very concrete that for some reason needs to be in a painting, um, and that I really go back at looking at, okay, like how does that look like? Well, the other day I had this painting where there were all kinds of like Asian rugs in the painting, and I've sort of looked at images of them, and then, but just to kind of refresh my memory of the basic build-up, the basic compositions that they used, and
Yeah,
then kind of free floated from there, inventing my own ways of making marks that trigger Asian rock in your head.
yeah,
Because that's another thing. Like I'm probably like a too lazy and impatient person to really sit there and render an Asian rug with kind of, doing each little ornament, each little color thing with
yeah.
texture of rug and all of that kind of stuff. That would drive me nuts. So I always try to look for ways how can I make marks that do trigger that thing in your head, but they're nothing like imitating it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's fascinating how you sometimes can get away with just a blip of paint, a smear somewhere that all of a sudden looks like something,
Yeah.
but it's not anything like it.
So, did I understand it right that when you start you do your smaller study, or nowadays you just get on with it? Do you draw with paint, or is there a drawing phase to your process?
Yeah, there's a drawing phase. I mean, I do draw with pencil, and I do draw in sketchbooks with like an ink pen. But my favorite way of drawing is with gouache and brushes.
Is this when you're starting the big picture, the big canvas? Is there
Yes,
a
yeah,
drawing phase
yeah, and
there?
like
Yeah.
there's absolutely a drawing phase, and then the newer paintings you can see it, right? Like oftentimes, then the feet of people will not be finished, or there's parts that are just left the way they were in the very initial stage. So if you look at my newer work carefully, generally you can find the whole history of how the painting evolved within the painting. So that's in 99% of the cases, the painting has parts that are just left like they looked in the first 10 minutes of the thing.
Yeah. Okay. Diane Schumacher says, what informed the decision of substrate to paint on? For example, choosing rubber previously and currently choosing to work on linoleum or wood panel. What compels this choice, knowing there's inherent degradation with linoleum and rubber that more conventionally treated materials don't have?
Well, so like with rubber, definitely there will be a completely different aging process, and it will deteriorate quicker and differently. But the paintings that I did on rubber, they had to do with anxiety and angst and fears that we have, and like how to what degree fears are rational. And so on the one hand side, it came into play that the rubber kind of sags off the walls, right? And it was cutting into it, and it was kind of falling apart, and the shapes were kind of almost cubist natured in the way that the support kind of fractures. And I find that really interesting because I think a lot of our anxieties in life come from our inability to see the big picture and the detail at the same time, right? Like when we focus on a detail in something, we lose track of the big picture very easily. And at the same time, when we keep the track of the big picture, we lose track of details. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the gorilla experiment, just another science little project that I've read about that I love. So there's like this experiment where they had people look at a football game or a soccer game, depending on where you live, and the people in the test were supposed to count how many times the blue team touches the ball. So just sitting there counting, okay, blue team touches, counting. And then in the end, they didn't ask them, okay, like how many times did the blue team have ball contact? They asked them, did you see the man in the gorilla suit? And almost all of the people who did the experiment said, like, what gorilla suit guy are you talking about? And then it turns out that at several points in the football match, a guy in a gorilla suit was walking through the football field, waving at the camera, standing there for a little while, dancing, walking out of the picture, disappearing. And people didn't notice because they were so focused on the task that they had set for them. And so coming back to the rubber and fracturing and playing with the support and making that three-dimensional, for me was very important because it makes you as the viewer having to move in front of the painting the entire time to try to puzzle together the entire picture, because you can never from one point see it without distortions or probably pieces entirely missing, right? Like you have to move and you have to play that game between trying to assemble the whole piece and looking at details in one spot.
Yeah.
So that to me was philosophically very interesting. And at the same time, doing exactly, because I find, for example, with collectors, one of their biggest fears is that their paintings could deteriorate and could break. But obviously that's also very irrational, because every painting, the second I set down the brush, it starts aging. Actually, in oil painting, the drying process is an aging process that keeps going and going and going. And the paint gets older and older and drier and brittle, more and more brittle, right? So it's, to me, that was very interesting, giving collectors paintings that will age in front of their eyes. And they have visibly aged, even though they still exist and they're still holding on. But they definitely have aged. And I thought that was very interesting. But to come back to the very beginning, commercially, of course, these paintings were a complete failure, because I think I only sold 2 of these paintings.
The
Right?
rubber
Because
paintings.
the rubber paintings, yeah.
All right. Wow.
So also that was something that the art market didn't like. Choosing that material, doing something weird like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder why though, because like what's the Damien Hirst one with the in the not the sharks and stuff, but the one with the head, or even the banana, stuck on the wall. I mean, that degrades, and you have to replace the banana, and it's.
Oh, there's tons of contemporary art that, I mean, like so many artists use sellotape these days, or like just packing tape. The packing tape will not last. And recently I stumbled across an article where they were describing that there's actually companies already who consult collectors when they buy a painting, how much they will have to invest in the future in maintaining that painting.
Wow.
Right? Because there's so much, or artwork in general, because there's so many materials being used that are much more fragile than the ones I've used in my paintings and in my artworks. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
to me that seems also very important, going beyond the expected mediums, right? Like just
Mm.
oil on canvas or acrylic on canvas, to challenge that notion in my own head. Because in the end, it has to do with challenging myself just as much as the viewer or a collector.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you explain what you meant about anxiety getting in by not being able to hold the bigger picture and the details at the same time? I was with you except for that bit. I didn't understand that bit.
Yeah, so what I mean, like, I think that does cause a lot of anxiety because, we when we try to organize our life or buy into the illusion that we can control our lives and that we're rational creatures, it has that effect that we, you know, I mean, a very concrete example for you, like when I I get very busy with art fairs and exhibitions and things. Like I plot out my when to do paintings and everything. But in order to go into the studio to focus on one painting and really work on that painting and buying into one of those lies that I tell myself that I have all the time in the world and there's like I could take a whole year painting this painting, it doesn't matter. Um, but then I completely usually lose track of organizing everything around exhibitions, or I don't answer emails anymore. And that, to a certain degree, causes for me anxiety because I know, okay, like I know I've read like a few emails really haphazardly in the morning, but I didn't really take in the information. I didn't react, and I know that eventually there's going to be a pile of emails that are just unanswered. So I'm sort of focusing on the detail of painting my paintings, but I'm losing track of the big picture of what it means to be an artist, painting my studio and my studio practice and organizing exhibitions, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, got it Martin Prado in New York says, "You are truly one of the best in the world. Your portraits have such thick brushstrokes. Your portraits have such thick brushstrokes. It seems. Are they painted in one go, or about how many painting sessions does it take you to finish a face?"
So yeah, thank you for that compliment. Um, they usually are painted more or less in one session. The portraits are, and the reason for that is that I generally find if a painting doesn't have the right kind of flow and the right kind of rhythm from the get-go, like no amount of tweaking and forcing it will make it ever look the way I want it to look. So rather than take a scraper and scrape out the painting and restart it the next day, and if it comes to that, I scrape it out again and restart again until it kind of flows in one go, or maybe like some little corrections the next day, like in a portrait. Like with larger paintings, of course, there's many more days involved. But I found that, you know, if something doesn't work right within a reasonable amount of time, like it will not get better by just adding and adding onto it. Usually,
Yeah.
like that opens up that really horrible trap of that you focus a lot of your energy in an area of the painting that isn't working, and in the end that of course leads to that area being the most focused on area in a painting, right? So you're drawing everybody's eyes to the area that wasn't working in the get-go.
Yeah. Are you more of an alla prima kind of painter, or are you glazing as well?
I started with glazing, using that a lot, and I've completely gotten away from it now. I'm hardly doing any glazing anymore. So it's more or less alla prima, or several layers of alla prima painting on top of each other.
Yeah, right. Erwin Cruz on Twitter says, do you choose a limited color palette beforehand or intuitively making color choices as you go along?
So I do consciously choose like a limited color palette, and it's usually always more or less the same one, because I've came found like these colors that for me seem to work just beautifully to get more or less all the colors, to mix all the colors that I need and want. And generally, the more colors you have on your palette, the more confusing it becomes, and the more you kind of ask yourself, okay, like, where am I going to use that color now? So I'm starting with that relatively limited palette, and then adding colors where I find, okay, like just through mixing, I can get that particular type of color. Now I need to
Yeah.
add like a new one.
Yeah. So what is your limited palette that you start with then?
So it's white, obviously. The white, something that I read Lucian Freud was doing, has like a little bit of charcoal mixed into it. So it's not completely white, but it's a bit broken.
Okay. What kind of white is that? Like titanium white or lead white?
It's I use titanium white, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They used to buy Kremser white, but I mean, the stuff is toxic, and it's not that much different and better than titanium white. And it's in Germany virtually impossible to get, because you need like stores need to have a special poison selling license. There was only one art shop that sold the stuff anyway. So there's white, and then I do have one that kind of is more an ultramarine kind of blue, so it lends itself to being mixed with reds. And I've got like a Prussian phthalo blue, kind of blue that goes more towards the green side of the spectrum. It can be easily mixed with yellows. I've got one of my favorite pigments, cadmium orange, which is a super versatile, amazingly beautiful color, and it's one of the few ones that can compete with strong pigment like Prussian blue, for example, which is very intense. So it's sort of like the fighter that goes into the fight with that. Um, there's a yellow on there, like also one yellow that's a little bit warmer, one that's colder. Um, uh, Red that's more there for mixing with yellows, and a red that's very much leaning to the blue side, and that's it.
Okay. And
It's
no black.
no black. No,
No.
I
Okay.
find black is completely. I mean, like in 20 years of painting, I haven't used a black. I've never felt that it was missing in any way. I think the risk of having black on your palette is so much bigger than the benefit, because it's so easy. Like once in a mixture, black and white get together, they break every color. They take the guts out of every color really easily and very quickly. So, and I find that when the black is there, then people tend to always say like, oh yeah, like this, I don't know, like this red is a little bit too intense. I could just add some black. Then they find it gets too dark, and then they throw some white in there, and woof, like it's some kind of mud sludge that doesn't do anything anymore.
Mud sludge. Very good.
So I would highly recommend get rid of the black to everyone. But anyway, that's just my thing. I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that a lot of people use black to their great advantage, but like yeah, I can't use it.
Okay. Amy Jury in the UK says, please ask him about purple in capital letters. Does that mean something to you?
Yeah, probably like she alludes to my using purple a lot in paintings and blue tones a lot in paintings. Um, the short answer is that it does. It's a very unusual color that doesn't appear a lot in other painting. It's not usually being used a lot, and it does give the paintings a particular kind of weird, unearthly feel, which oftentimes is something I'm going for. Yeah, and it's sort of snuck into my palette when I was consciously trying to force myself out of the old master color spectrum. Because I started out with my paintings doing the old master painting style.
Yeah.
And that kind of inevitably brings like a certain color spectrum into your painting that's very warm influenced. And at some point I grew tired of it and I wanted to have more colder color palettes. So yeah, that's where the purple then snuck in. And purple is a fantastic color, but like that would lead too far. But it also has to do with, you know, color theoretical thinking, and that purple is such a beautiful, amazing color to create very vivid, interesting gray tones, like hundreds and hundreds of shades of gray, and it can be a very intense color and a very emotional color.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Anna C. in the Netherlands says, "Hi there, John and Ruprecht. I'd like to know if Ruprecht avoids certain colors in his paintings intentionally."
I don't think so. Like, I mean, they all seem to appear at some point. I can't think of any that don't come up. Quite the contrary. I mean, it's sort of fascinating to me that there seems to be an endless amount of colors available. But when you really go try to combine colors with each other, there isn't an endless amount. It almost feels like in music, you know, like where you have 8 or 12 tones, depending on how you look at it. And you use these tones to create endless shades of different sounds, which has more to do with the combination of notes with each other rather than that the notes are all different. And I feel the same way about paint, about color. For me, the thing that makes color really interesting is how different colors react with each other.
Yeah. Katie Pearson on Instagram says, "What is your color palette / range that makes those amazing colors filled with tension?" So you've kind of covered that, but if there's anything else you want to add.
I mean, no, there's not much I can add really. I mean, it's except that my advice for people who struggle with color is to sort of reduce it as much as you can. And I find that, you know, just with using complementary colors, like amazing things can happen then, and you can get so different variations of tone color without being too confused and about how to use them, right? Because I think the problem is more the oversaturation of choice oftentimes rather
Yeah.
than having less. Almost like going like I loathe going to the supermarket and shopping because like why do I need to have the, you know, 300 different kinds of flour? And that also forces me to actually look at each package and read what's in it. Like I don't want to read 300 packages of flour. It's annoying and it's obnoxious. I would be happy if there would be 3. That'd be plenty. But anyway, I'm not a big chef anyway. Like I think for people who love baking and cooking, like it's probably a completely good that there's 300. Anyway.
Um, do you have a particular medium that you like to use?
Yeah, it's a very simple medium that I mix myself. It's just sand oil and what used to be turpentine, and now replaced it with what is the spick oil, I think is an English word.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
So it's essentially just lavender oil, and it's supposed to be much better for your brain cells than turpentine is.
yeah.
And supposedly, it used to be what artists used before they started using turpentine. Only drawback is that it's very hard to get in larger amounts. Like generally, like when you try to buy it, you get it in these tiny little flasks of, like, you know, not even toothpaste amount or something. And it's wicked expensive. But my wife talked me out of, or talked me into getting rid of turpentine in the studio entirely, which I did.
Good. Do you have a favorite type of brush or make of brush or palette knife?
So see, I think, I mean, I'm not going to give brand recommendations because I don't have any sponsoring contracts. So I don't have to. But no, generally, I think there's two ways you can go about brushes. Like either you buy very, very expensive, very good brushes and take very good care of them and try to make them last, or you go and buy relatively inexpensive brushes. And I'm going more that route because I have like the ones with pretty thick, sturdy, is it sables, the hairs, because I like them. I want the traces of the brush being visible, and I'm not like a big blending guy. And
Oh
generally,
yeah,
like I think it depends
that sounds
more.
more like hogshead, hog's
Yeah,
hair,
hog's head
hogshead.
kind of stuff.
There,
Yeah, hog's
yeah,
hair stuff, like pretty thick bristles, right?
yeah,
And I kind of paint them into the ground, like I use them for I mean, oftentimes kind of use the brush kind of against the direction that you're supposed to be brushing
yes,
with it, and which destroys them really quickly. And I keep older brushes for that, and I just use them till they're dead, and then throw them out and get new ones. And I don't buy very expensive brushes anymore. I used to do that more when I was doing more glazing work, because then I think
yeah, right, yeah,
finer brushes are much more reasonable. And I don't use any, consciously don't use any small brushes. So I think the smallest brush I have is like is that like maybe a half a centimeter thick? So nothing smaller than that.
wow. And are they? Do you have a preference for like flats or filberts or rounds or like shape wise?
I do use the flat ones with the rounded bit. Those are
Filbert,
my
yeah.
favorite ones, and some round ones, kind of for more linear work.
Okay. And do you use palette knives or other kind of
I
tools?
I do use palette knives, but also not like any particular brand. I don't care. I just found that some last longer than others, and it's frustrating when you're in the middle of work and your palette knife just breaks off, and have to go searching for a new one. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one thing that I hate, like having to interrupt the flow and go searching for new new palette knives or something.
Yeah. And do you have a preference in shape of palette knife?
Um, I mean, I do like the ones that sort of look like a kite, like a
Yeah.
little wonky type kite, because they have so many edges that you can use, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And I use a lot of spatulas because I don't apply paint with a palette knife on the canvas. I just use the palette knives for mixing.
For mixing.
Yeah, because like when you paint larger paintings, you need larger amounts of paint, and like I find that the brushes are very limited at their ability to mix paint well. So if you want, like I spend a lot of time mixing colors before I use them on the palette with a palette knife.
Right, yeah.
And that's what I
And the
use the
spatch
palette knife for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And the spatulas you use, are they like artist spatulas or kitchen spatulas?
They're essentially just builder's spatulas with for fixing walls, holes in the wall.
Okay, so they're the flat ones. Yeah. Okay.
Flat ones, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Ken Cunningham again says the lines you carve into the linoleum seem like they would be a particularly scary moment coming late in the painting process, I assume. And speaking of linoleum, how did you come to using it as a substrate?
So, yeah, like the linoleum, like it's like one of those weird coincidences in life. We actually in our kitchen had the floors redone, and we wanted to put a linoleum floor there. So we ordered samples from the manufacturer. There's, in Germany, at least, there's only two companies that even make linoleum still. Um, so we had all these different, you know, pieces like this big um, at home in different colored linoleum, and they were lying around in our flat for ages and ages. And then eventually one day, my wife came and dumped them into my studio and said, like, can you use these for something? Which is usually just, you know, wives speak for somebody needs to get rid of these, and that somebody is you. Um, so yeah, so at first I was annoyed, and then I'm like, was holding them in my hand and said to myself, yeah, like linoleum is essentially 80% linseed oil, a little bit of cork, and fabric. Why not paint on them? I mean, it must be really fantastic painting on just linseed oil. So I tried that, and then, you know, obviously the idea was very um, obvious to try cutting into it and see what would happen if you kind of destroy the painting afterwards. And that's how that came about. And then it was like an explorative process of trying to come up with ways to build the support, because the linoleum, if would actually break really easily and deteriorate really easily if it didn't have like a sturdy support. So you have to mount it on something like wood or panels of some kind. Otherwise,
Yeah.
like it won't last.
And is it scary for you when you're at that point of like, okay, I'm going to start cutting into the lino on my finished painting?
Oh yeah, that's scary. Yeah, I just in the last show with Christine Hilliard in London, I had um, this painting that had actually turned out really nicely, and then, you know, I started cutting into it, and my first reaction was, "Oh my God, what did you do?" But in the end, like it works for what the painting does really, really quite well. But it's oftentimes a very scary process, especially because you know you can't take it back.
Yeah. Yeah. Leland Purvis again and says, does any painting happen after the lino block cutting goes on? Or is it the very last stage?
It's usually the very last stage, but every now and then I will do corrections when I find, okay, like I mean, just recently I've done a painting where it was giving me a lot of it was fighting me a lot, and I still, after I had cut the linoleum, I decided it needed some changes.
Yeah,
But
okay.
it doesn't make the painting easier, that's for sure, because you don't want to get the paint into the grooves that you've cut. Yeah.
Yeah. Why not?
Well, I mean, theoretically you could, but what I really love about the cutting into the painting is the contrast that happens between the paint, which never, even if you tape it, has like a really clean edge between one color to the next. And the linoleum that has such a crisp edge when you cut it, right? It
Yeah.
really looks like something cut out of it, literally.
Yeah.
And I love that contrast. And every now and then, like, I will mess about with that as well, and soften the edges. Or I've now done some paintings where I use like a power grinder working into it, which makes like a softer edge. But generally, like, I love the quality difference.
Yeah. Is there an element of similar to the rubber paintings where it's like has that jarring effect of, the person viewing is buying the illusion of 3 dimensions on a flat surface, and then you're kind of breaking that up by going, hey, look, I've just dug into it. This isn't 3-dimensional. It's the painting is not 3-dimensional. It's flat, but it looks 3-dimensional. And by cutting into it, you're kind of highlighting that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's sort of what makes figurative painting for me also really interesting. It's playing that game between creating an illusion and tearing it down at the same time. And I love when, in the viewer's head, ideally, you kind of flip-flop back and forth the entire time. Like the illusion builds up and falls apart, builds up and falls apart.
Yeah.
For me, that sort of creates movement in your mind, mental movement. And movement is something that I find very interesting, and is something that I work very hard to create in paintings, be it movement of time. So you have a sense of a before and after, right? So the whatever you're viewing is so unstable, let's say, that you inevitably get the sense there must be a moment before and there will be a moment after. So
yeah, right.
there happens movement there. And also just creating the illusion of things moving in the painting. And that, to me, is really interesting because it triggers movement in your head, and it makes you move in your head. And that's, for me, very interesting. I want people to move in their minds.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, God, I'm really enjoying this podcast. I've listened to a few now and they're brilliant. And there's so many of them. And I've learned so much from listening to them. And you know what? If I met that John Dalton fella in real life, I'd love to buy him a cup of tea and have a chat with him. I'd love to do that every month if I could. Well, now you can. The tea part at least, because this podcast runs on cups of tea bought for me by people like you who listen to the podcast and send me the price of a cup of tea once a month through the Patreon account. That's patreon.com/John Dalton Gently Does It, all one word. And if you're one of those people who already send me cups of tea through Patreon, thanks a million. The tea is lovely and I really appreciate it. Now, the great thing is that if you can't afford to send me the price of a cup of tea, or you don't want to, that's fine. You still get exactly the same podcast for free. It's sort of an honor system where the people who can afford it and want to pay for the people who can't or don't want to. So it's all lovely. So if you'd like to send me a cup of tea once a month, you can do that through Patreon. I'd really appreciate it. It makes a huge difference to me. How do you check yourself as you're working? You did mention mirrors. Like some artists use mirrors, or they'll turn the painting upside down, or they'll take photos on their phone, or they'll get their friends in to give them little critiques. What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, just as I've already described, I used mirrors, changing the distance, kind of standing on my head, trying to turn the painting upside down. I mean, with bigger paintings, like with smaller ones, you can just turn them around, obviously, but with larger paintings, that's sometimes not feasible. All these kind of little tricks, leaving the room.
Can you actually do a handstand?
No, I can't. Of course I can't.
Okay.
I wish I could. It would be really awesome. But no, I can't.
Getting impressed there.
No. It's more or less kind of like just looking between my legs, kind of.
Yes. like the rest of us.
Doing kind of exactly kind of weird half-assed yoga moves.
Do you take pictures on your phone or anything like that?
No, no, I don't. I don't like. I don't. For me, they're not helpful because the phone always messes with the color so much and kind of does shift. At least for my eye, does shift the contrasts a lot. So like I don't see how the phone would be helpful in checking because it does so much of its own kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that might be because I'm just not equipped with one of the really super modern phones that I hear make amazing pictures.
What's your varnishing preference?
None at all. Very
None at
quick
all.
answer.
You don't varnish at all.
I don't polish at all.
And is that for a reason?
Yeah, absolutely. I work very hard to get exactly the kind of gloss on particular parts of the paintings that I want, and I don't want a homogeneous overall sameness on all parts of the painting. Especially
Right.
like in darker areas. It's for me there's like also a sweet spot between them looking dark enough without being over glossy, because the more reflection you obviously have on a dark area, the more reflected light will sort of take away that darkness, right? Because you have all these little reflections in the dark areas in the painting.
Yeah, right. Ken Cunningham on Patreon again says, I also love the low contrast nature of your paintings. Could you also speak to how you came to this approach as well? What it means to you? Thanks so much.
Um, I think it's just a personal preference, like some aesthetical choice that I was going after. That's probably like all that there is to it, and also that they have a particular mood, and I don't think every. I mean, I've done some paintings that have quite harsh contrasts and quite a bit of contrast, but I don't think it's always necessary. And to be quite honest, I think if you're thinking sort of outside the old master chiaroscuro lighting situation, oftentimes contrasts are very, very low. I mean, just looking at you on the screen now, most of the contrasts within your face, aside from the nostrils, the mouth, and the eyes, happens probably within like a range of a scale of 30, right? On a scale of 100.
Yeah, right. How do you name your paintings?
With great joy usually, because I love giving titles to paintings, and I love to come up with titles that um, I think titles can be a beautiful way to open up new avenues or kind of mess with people's minds from the get-go, right? And also get them thinking, because they're like, what does the title have to do with the painting? I don't understand it. Like oftentimes the titles don't seem to have to do anything with the paintings at first, and but sometimes if you think about it, you can actually find out what it does mean. So I love giving titles. I really have very, 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 very few paintings that are untitled, if any at all.
So, how do you come up with them?
Um, Usually kind of talking to myself or thinking aloud while I paint the paintings.
Right.
Or like recently I was invited to a show with like a flower theme, which is very unusual for me. Like I don't usually do flowers much. So I had like 6 flower paintings. And then I was thinking like, okay, like I'm gonna title flower paintings. And then I remember that there's like this Rolling Stones song that I really, really like. It's called Dead Flowers. And, I went to listen to it again because I remember part of the lyrics, but not all of them. And I noticed that the lyrics were just beautiful as painting titles. So all the 6 paintings have a line from the Dead Flowers Rolling Stones song as their titles. That's one way, for example.
Yeah, very good. Uh, Sasan Rene on Instagram. Sorry if I got your name wrong there. I'd be interested to know if he could share any methods for coming up with interesting scenes and narratives in paintings, or if these images just come to him so naturally.
I think I don't know, I can't give any advice on that because they just come, right? Like they're just there. And um, I mean, there's this beautiful TED talk by Elizabeth Gilbert where she talks about creativity. And she tells the story that before she had her first super successful book, she she was working as a journalist and did an interview with Tom Waits. And he told her that ideas sort of are flying around like butterflies. You just have to catch them and be really careful that you don't break them on while you're catching them. And that as a young man, he would, whatever he was doing, he was interrupting that on the spot to write down a song idea. And then one day he's going down the highway in LA again, and an idea comes to his mind, and he's just about to pull over from across all the lanes and stop on the side of the road to write down that idea. And then said to himself, like, this is insane. Like, I'm sitting at the piano 8 hours a day, waiting for your idea to come by. If you come now, you're probably not worth being written down. Come back later when I'm sitting at the piano. And he kind of, after that, he never did that again, that he just stopped anything he was doing to write down ideas. And I think there's two interesting things in there. One is that maybe he's right, that a good idea comes, and even if you can't act on it right away, it'll come back if you give it enough opportunities, meaning just being in the studio, doing your thing, working, and they will come eventually.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Gian D'Alessio on Twitter says, "What's your approach to learning composition?"
My biggest piece of advice is go look at other people's art. Look at paintings that you really like. And I mean, paintings, ideally, of course, not of, just portrait painting, because there's enough people who do portraits, where you just have the figure in the middle. I'm talking about a bit more complex compositions. But look at people that you like and try to ask yourself, like, why do I like that? What did they do that works? Like, how did they construct their paintings? Because if you think about it, either intuitively or very consciously, good painters will have put a lot of thought and a lot of careful consideration into constructing their compositions. And for example, one of my composition heroes that I think he's one of the most brilliant compositional artists is Degas. Like his compositions are just really killer. And if you like the trick he does in almost every one of his paintings is that the paintings are 100% symmetrical. So like if he has like a woman washing her hair, the wherever the hair is falling is probably right on the center line, and then like the distance from her back to the one side of the painting will be matched on the other side exactly by a door frame or something like that. And then you will have like another line that's in the horizontals that are exactly matched up, and they're repeated. But he does it in a way that's so sneaky and so subtle, and with some huge imbalance. Like, for example, like there's these paintings of his where he has 10 figures, but they're all squeezed into 1/4 of the painting, and the whole rest of the painting is empty, which is super, super interesting because it's a painting of ballerinas warming up, and your mind just wants to drag them into this empty space, right? Like we can't tolerate this empty space, and we want them to move in there. So like again, we have this feeling of movement that's being created because our mind wants these ballerinas to move, and so we make them in our heads, and it's incredible. So do look at other people's work that you like, and try to start with like how do they relate their compositions to the center lines. That how it usually starts, right? Like we have a very strong sense for symmetry, so usually the horizontal and the vertical center lines are super important, and diagonals, how do they use the picture diagonals, and because that's how we relate to the circumference of the panel that we're using, or the canvas or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Thomas Wharton in West Virginia says, as an artist who has spent time in America and now lives and works in Germany, what's your take on the differences in approach to painting, particularly from the standpoint of content, particularly from the standpoint of symbolism and metaphor?
So between Europe and the US, I, I'm not sure that. Well, let's put it this way. I think like what is amazing about the US is that, and that was for me sort of like the saving grace when I graduated from art school, is that in the US is such a large art market that you can find a niche for whatever you're doing, right? So there's like this art market for people who paint like old masters. There's an art market for people who paint cowboy paintings. There's an art market for people who used to be illustrators and now do these really fantastically beautiful wonky paintings. In Europe, there's one art market only, and either you're in it or you're not, more or less, right? And I think that's a big difference. So the US tends to be a bit more open-minded to allow more things. And I can't even count the amount of conversations that I had with colleagues where they either said, like, I don't understand how you were allowed to paint the way you do. Like if I would have painted studying in my university in Germany, figures, like my professors would have thrown me out of class. They wouldn't have tolerated it. Right? And up to people who say like how can you paint figures in a painting? That's not contemporary. You can't, like that's like what are you doing? You know, they still can't cope with figures appearing in a painting because the dogma is so strong that they're not supposed to.
This is in Europe.
In Europe, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially probably in Germany, you know, with the sole exception of the Leipzig school. But it was like really, really fascinating. That's a few years back now, but when Jenny Saville was becoming really big and well known, there was like this article in Art magazine, which is one of Germany's biggest magazines on contemporary art. And at the time, it was fascinating that a painter like her would even get like a several-page article. And you could tell that the woman who's writing about her paintings really loved the paintings. But she was contorting herself over 10 pages of article to explain why Jenny Saville was painting figures, but she wasn't really painting figures. It's not really painting, right? And because like her instinct to, you know, that she liked paintings with figures in it was so forbidden and so bad and not possible that she tried with all her might to kind of fight that. You know? It was really absurd reading that. I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but it's figures, and it's so much about figures and the fleshy quality of bodies, and you can't say like, yeah, no, they're not really figurative paintings. They are.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've never been to Art Basel, but I've always thought it would be really funny to put a load of really nice figurative paintings, the sort of paintings like that are made by the artists I talk to mostly on the
Mm.
podcast. Put them on the way out, like the way they used to put sweets at the cash register in supermarkets. I think they still do, and just call that room guilty pleasures. So that after everyone is like schlepped around looking at all the, what's acceptable, they can kind of go and look at paintings that they're not supposed to like, but they probably do like a lot.
Yeah, it's true. They probably do like them a lot. I don't know. Like I've always found it puzzling. With outside of the big battle about is painting still cool, or are we allowed to paint figuratively? And I think you know one has to be careful to not sound too self-pitying all the time. I don't understand like how in a field that's so much about creativity and the freedom of the mind and just roaming wherever you go, that there's such strict limits of what you're allowed to be doing and what you're not allowed to be doing. Seems really bizarre to me.
Yeah, it's looks to me like that's much more of a market force thing. It's to like what's fashionable rather than it doesn't seem to have a lot to do with creativity. It seems to be an external thing of like, yeah, you can do whatever you like, but they're not going to sell.
Yeah, it's true, but partly why they're not selling is because they're not being sold, right? Like people are not. I mean, because like look at an artist like John Curran, right? Like if the right gallery puts the right kind of weight behind it, of
Yep.
course they can sell it. It's really just what do you want to sell? Um, yeah, but I think that's it's a never-ending discussion that doesn't lead anywhere. And I think, to be quite honest, what is it really about? Why do we make art? Because we enjoy it so much, and we love making art, right? And so anyone who can, in what way ever, support himself or herself being an artist, that's that's a victory in itself. If you're being accepted by the cool big art market, or if your work is hung in any of the great museums, who cares? It's really about being able to go to the studio and painting paintings every day, no?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think yeah, for a lot of people, certainly that I talk to, that is the goal. That's success. But then there are other artists who are like, no, no, I have to be selling for this much money. I have to be in these shows, and that's their thing. I don't relate to them myself, but they exist, as you know.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I think good for them, right? I think the only thing that you can't let happen is to become bitter if that then in the end doesn't materialize, right? Like I think lofty goals are good, but you know, I mean, for my part, I've sort of accepted that I love the way I work and I paint, and I don't want to change it to reach certain goals. But I know that it probably will be keeping me out of certain shows, out of certain galleries, out of certain heights of the art market
Yeah,
or the art world, right? And I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that's just a decision what you want to do with your life, and I'm really like if I think about why it seems alluring to be in certain galleries or in certain heights of the art world, is because that would give you the feeling that you're making so much money that you certainly can keep painting the next couple of years, and you can outsource all the kind of BS of the art world to somebody else, right? And you could be more in your studio. So that tells me like, yeah, okay, my real goal is not like the cool openings. I don't care for them at all. Like the real goal would be to kind of be left alone sitting in my studio doing what I'm doing now. So like, why would I be complaining?
Yeah, that's very wise. Chris Pickering on Patreon, thanks for the tea, Chris, says, "Hey John, would love to know how Ruprecht knows when he has finished a painting. Love the dreamlike, abstracted quality of his work." So, how do you know when you're finished?
Um, for me, like the painting and painting is like a conversation with that painting, and it's just when the conversation has run out, and the painting and I don't have to tell each other anything anymore. Yeah,
So,
it's
does it finish when the painting stops talking to you, or when you stop talking to the painting?
it's sort of like a mutual petering out of the conversation, right? Like where
Okay.
kind of like like when you even with a good friend, you can sit like at 4 in the morning and you've drunk enough glasses of wine, and um, eventually you get tired and the conversation slows down a bit, and then eventually you decide, oh, I think it's time to go to bed. But to me, there's no sadness about it, because really life of a painting only starts when it leaves the studio. It's that's a bit more like raising children. Their life really gets going once the parents aren't involved anymore, because then all of a sudden it becomes their own life. And
Yeah, yeah.
childhood and the time with the parents was just like a short blip in that trajectory of the adventures that they have to themselves. And that's how I sort of look at the paintings, right? Like the idea that the painting goes out and somebody sits in front of it and gets something out of it. That's, I mean, amazing when that happens.
Yeah.
And then a new conversation starts, right? It's like my friend left the studio and goes out in the world and has beautiful conversations with other people.
That's lovely. Anubis on Twitter says, "How long did it take you to feel competent within your craft?"
Okay, I don't think you ever feel, oh, no, no, competent, yes, but I mean, it's funny that the question, like that question comes, because it was on an opening in Prague recently, where these really sweet, wonderful youngsters came, and they all, were really insecure still, and they're like, oh yeah, like, does it ever go away that you think like a painting could go wrong? Like, do you ever feel secure? Like, you must feeling so secure, and like, no, 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 it's like that never goes away. Like every day you have self-doubts, or you start a painting and you're like, I can't believe I mucked it up so bad. Like how could it go so wrong? Like, I should be knowing better, and like you still mess them up. So yeah, I mean, like a certain confidence comes, and like a certain trust, and eventually something good will happen again. But man, it's still hard sometimes, yeah.
Well, I can feel the collective shoulders of everyone listening dropping in relief, like, okay, Ruprecht screws up just like the rest of us.
No, like, yeah, I think everybody feels that way. Like, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, that's the beauty of it. And to be quite honest, I think we always try to find these challenges that force us to kind of go to the edge again, right? Like, because it would be boring going always on the same kind of journey. And it's not like that there's any limits to it, right? Like, and that doesn't necessarily mean like every painting has to get more complicated or more complex to be more challenging. I think sometimes quite like making a painting more simple and straightforward can be a much bigger challenge, and putting less kind of fluffy subterfuge in there to distract from that you didn't have anything to say really, or you didn't really know what to say. So
Yeah.
I think that the challenges, as you grow in skill, like your goals of what you want to accomplish grow. alongside that.
Yeah. 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 Pau Tremuls in Barcelona. Sorry if I've ruined your surname there, Pau. Hello, John. Hello, Ruprecht. I love your work. She's talking about you there, Ruprecht. I've already read and listened to some interviews, so it occurs to me to ask you about your day-to-day as an artist, if you have any routines and that kind of thing, if you want to share them with us. Thank you very much, and greetings from Barcelona. And yes, we want an exhibition here too.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. I'd love to go to Barcelona for an exhibition, and thanks for the lovely comments on Instagram that you do leave. So yeah, the daily routine, it's really quite simple. I've usually I usually try to get office work and stuff out of the way in the mornings, because I get up very early, do some sports, then do the morning shift with the kids, planning with my wife who does the office work for me. And then I go to the studio and do emails and my part of the office work. And then usually by around noon, I try to be in front of the canvas paint. And yeah, and I try as much as possible to keep that routine flowing and going. Because, I hold it like Tom Waits, like if you in the studio for long enough, good things will happen. You just
So
need
how
to
long
give that
will you be
time.
there? Yeah, yeah. How long will you be there then for if you start at 12?
That very much depends. I mean, like we all know that feeling. Like there's some days where you just hit the stride from the get-go and things go really smoothly, and you feel sort of like at 5 or 6, wow, like that has been a wonderful day. Like I leave it here because from now on I'm just gonna muck things up. And sometimes you kind of got stuck on something, and you're fighting it and fighting it and fighting it, and it can be 8 at night, and until you finally let go, either because you give them up and you lost, or finally you finally got it to go your way. Yeah.
Very good. Kelly Mogilka in California says, "Thanks, John, for getting the best artists." You're welcome, Kelly. Ruprecht, could you talk a bit about your subject matter? What within you drives the content for your paintings? The circus theme mainly. Love your work. It evokes such a strangely familiar emotion with me that I'm curious where it's coming from. So you've talked about lots to do with that, but just the different thing in that question was about the circus themes.
Yeah, circus themes. Like I think I mean, basically, I think that the circus is for me such a natural theme. Like, why wouldn't you do paintings about circus, right? Like, because in a way, like our life is a circus. It seems the circus has a lot to do with building up the illusion of something, which I think we're trying to do in our lives. But it's also the circus has something anarchistic about it. For example, I'm fascinated with these uniforms that all the circus helpers and circus directors and people like that wear, right? Like they have these uniforms that sort of remind one of what uniforms look like in the Napoleon was around. And I often wonder, like, how did that come about? And if anybody knows, like, leave me a message on Instagram, so I'd love to know. And for me, like, it feels it must have had something to do with either or both, that they, the people in the circus bought old uniforms and then used them up. And at the same time, for me, it has something of making fun of the authority that seems to go along with uniforms. right? Like when you see them in the circus, they lose their authority and they're being kind of made fun of and poked fun at. And I like that aspect about it. So like, and plus it's a stage, and I see my painting sort of like a stage where I set up a scene that, you know, gets you to buy into a certain illusion for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. Are they still going? Are circuses still going?
No, no, I'm like I haven't done any circus paintings in quite a while. I mean, I've done one that was sort of, I mean, it's called the Wild West Show, and it has a little bit of the that circus feel, but for me, it was more like in German, there's a word I don't know that translates into English, variété, so like a variety show kind of thing,
Oh yeah.
and and there used to be actually in the days of the real Wild West shows that they brought all the way to Europe, where people would show like what the Wild West is like, right?
Yeah.
And like cowboys would be riding around on horses on a stage, and they do little fights with Indians and wild animals and that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
um, that
I
to
actually
me,
meant are circuses still going? Have you I haven't been to a circus in
oh,
years.
oh yes, yeah, 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 oh yeah, they're still going. Oh yeah, there's
Are
some
they?
circuses. Yeah, 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 yeah.
They just don't have the animals anymore, I don't think, do they? That's kind of frowned on now a
They
lot.
that's frowned on a lot now,
Correctly.
but like still, I mean, correctly, yeah, but I still not that long ago, like because with kids you do these kind of weird things, like you go to the
Yeah, that's
circus
why I'm
and
asking you.
right, and we've been to the circus that's actually like, as far as circuses go, it's really top notch European circus. Try to recall if they still had animals. I don't think they did really. They've also gotten rid of their animals.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, oh yeah, circus is still around. Like there's
Oh, okay.
even like, I mean, I've recently seen like a poster. So they started up now after Corona, because with Corona it was very hard for them, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But just before we've been to circus with the kids, like maybe in 19 or so. This
Okay.
was a lovely show.
Yeah, I mean, I knew like Cirque du Soleil and all that, and that's brilliant. But just the sort of circuses you used to see, I don't remember seeing them around as much. But yeah,
Oh
no,
yeah,
it's good.
definitely, and then they're
Good.
still around.
Good that they're still going.
Yeah.
Thomas Wharton again says, you seem to pull material from lots of sources, particularly in the media. With so much visually swirling around you in all forms of the media, what triggers your desire to realize something in paint? How do you make sense of the overwhelming avalanche and cacophony of our image filled world?
Probably by not exposing myself to that much imagery. When I'm thinking about it, like I'm exposing myself to a lot of um, auditory stimulants, I would say, but not that much visual stuff. And really, even come to think of it, even in the Corona time, like I didn't get to watch any TV recently. And I know that in a way it's a pity, because there's so many good TV shows now, and I'd love to see some of them, but I don't ever know when to watch them really. Um, so it's mostly through hearing the news that I get my information on contemporary stuff that then flows into the paintings. And that has the
Right.
advantage that it isn't connected to some visual, right? It's just an audit, something that you heard. And as an example, like a story that kind of really triggered me to do a painting recently was like that was while Trump's ban on Muslim travel to the US was going. There was this story on NPR where they were talking about a small library in a border town that goes right across the border of Canada and the US. And the border within the town is marked with flower planters in the middle of the road. And to save money, because it's a fairly small community, they've decided to build a library together, the Canadian and the American part. And the library is built right on the border. And citizens from Canada and from America can just go there, and you don't need a passport because you're not really crossing the border.
Yeah.
And so the story was about that students from the Middle East who couldn't travel back home because they were afraid they wouldn't be let back into the country to finish their studies, and their families who weren't allowed to travel into the US anymore. The families were coming to Canada and meeting their children in that library to see each other face to face. And I thought it was such a moving story and such a beautiful visual that in a place of books and of ideas and learning and all that wonderful stuff that libraries stand for, people could still meet face to face with each other, even though circumstances in the world didn't allow for that anymore. And that, for example, is something, that I heard and where said that just you have to make a painting about that idea.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Sheila Horowitz on Patreon, thanks for the tea, Sheila, says, the most interesting thing about von Kaufmann is the way he thinks. I'd love to know where he gets his ideas. What is he indicating with the calligraphic shapes he often overlays on his forms, as if the shape just hung there in space?
Well, I mean, like then that's hard to generalize, right? Because they often do have different meanings. I mean, like oftentimes they started out like a reference to comic books where you have speech bubbles, right? Like you've got these little bubbles that have speech in them, but mine don't have speech in them. So they're sort of bubbles of speechlessness, of people not being able to express themselves anymore. And that to me is something maybe that I feel a lot acutely, but I think that's also one of the things that mankind struggles with, that we don't find the right words to talk to each other still, oftentimes.
Yeah. She also says, is he constructing his work formally, or does he have some concept he is exploring? Also, he often contrasts line work with rendered form, and I wonder what he's thinking when he makes that choice.
So line work with rendered imagery. I mean, I think we've also covered that as well before. It's the idea of leaving visual traces of the evolution of the painting to a finished painting. So I love that when within the painting it remains visible how the painting came about. And I love that contrast between finished areas that create an illusion of space and other areas that kind of break with that and all of a sudden just come back to a drawing, which is the most basic expression of creating a form or a shape.
Yeah.
But even that I find very fascinating, that very simple lines, if put right, can trigger a feeling of space in our heads. How is that possible? That's incredible, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And are you exploring a concept when you're constructing your paintings?
I'm not entirely sure what you means with content, like a concept in that case,
Well,
because concept can mean like a lot of things, right?
Yeah, she's saying, are you constructing your work purely formally, or do you have some concept in your mind that you're exploring?
Oh yes, no. Like they're not purely formally, like it ideally, I mean, like it doesn't work equally as well with each painting, but ideally, as I've also previously mentioned, if the composition and the construction of the painting and the content of the painting or the concept overlap, then that's the best thing that can happen.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always work because sometimes I feel it's sort of like playing chess against yourself on a chessboard with figures on all sides, right? Like where you kind of every time you move one figure, something else will shift on the field, and I think that's a lot of times with painting that way. So sometimes, let's say, to get a more expressive figure, you have to give up something compositionally that would be more ideal, or like you have to let go of a color, or realize that something that compositionally would have worked really beautifully with the concept kind of makes the painting too stiff, and then I let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. Olivia Leona on Instagram says, "I love Kaufman!" Exclamation mark. Please ask him the story behind Die Erbschaft in 2007, the painting of a fireplace and the three figures with the animal heads. I love all the emotion in this work. What is the relationship that he has with his figures? Thanks, John. You're welcome, Olivia.
So I think you mean the Erbschaft, no? Is that possible? Yeah, I think it is.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the idea was, it's one of those quirky ideas that just was in my head, and it had to do with just like this found image that of an old photograph of these old guys kind of being in this weird bend position, and it's really rude painting actually, where like one is bending over and they're all standing behind each other, and the guy behind them is like about to cut the balls off the first person.
Okay.
But to me, like it has to do with how you how things are passed along in families, not only like and it's not only things but also ideas, and how that can truncate people in their own development. Just these expectations that an older generation has on them, and the pressures. And maybe that's especially acute because I have that one in front of my name, so which in Germany has like some kind of or used to have like some kind of aristocratic meaning. And so there's in my circle of acquaintances, there's people who used to be barons or grafen, and doesn't have all that much real life meaning today anymore, I don't think, but it loads a lot of family expectations on those poor bastards. And I've seen people kind of break under those expectations. So that's essentially what this painting is about. That's why they're also standing in this kind of like stately room, with wood paneling and this big old fireplace and a chandelier on the ceiling. And yeah.
Right. Ken Rutsky in New York says, "You started doing figurative work long before it made something of a comeback. How did you feel about the Leipzig school painters that emerged in your wake? Do you have any favorites in that movement, like Tim Eitel?
Eitel.
Eitel, thank you.
Eitel. Yeah, I mean, like I really can say that they've come up in my wake. It's sort of like a weird coincidence, and I sort of welcome their rise, because it allowed for my work even to be seen again, and allowed me to move back to Germany and be able to show work there for the reasons I explained earlier. But it was really literally like I remember through a friend, I was invited to show some of my work to a gallery in New York at the time, like early, like before the Leipzig School. And they looked at my portfolio and they were kind of laughing in my face, and they're like, "You're not serious. Like, you think we're going to show figurative painting? Like, are you nuts?" And then I remember, like, it was like maybe 3/4 of a year later, and the Leipzig School had kind of exploded. And I walked past that gallery again, and the whole window was full with half-assed, really quickly thrown together figurative stuff, right? Like people who painted little stuff from photograph, and like it was all very unoriginal, but tell that they were all like, "Oh, we need really quickly some figurative painters. Where can we get some? Well, let's find some."
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And so that was sort of my experience with that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the only thing that I really don't like is that the in real life the reverse happens quite a lot. That people think I'm part of the Leipzig school, which I'm definitely not.
Yeah, right.
Um, and yeah,
Didn't like I know like Gerhard Richter didn't do it wasn't classic kind of figurative, but in the beginning he was doing a lot of very figurative work, wasn't he? Or have I got that
oh no,
right?
like he was always doing figurative work, but
Yeah.
see, I think that was the genius of what he was doing, because he was mixing it up with these abstract paintings. He was mixing it up
Right.
with these very conceptual paintings, and then he invented the style, with these sfumato painting style. That they're always like a little blurry. They're based on
Yes.
photographs, but they look like photographs where
They're out of
if you
focus.
have
Yeah.
reading glasses and you didn't bring your reading glasses along, and that it's it's insane what that does to the imagery. Like he did these paintings. I always forget what the official title is. Like some date it is about the terrorists that were terrorizing Germany from the mid 70s till the
Oh
late
yeah.
80s. Um, and the first generation, they were found dead in their prison cells in prison, and there's up to this day conspiracy theories about them being executed by the state and stuff like that.
Mm.
And he just did paintings of the photographs that were published in the newspapers, but man, these paintings are strong. They're really, really good. Um, and they're so, yeah, that he like, because like he just snuck them by.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
He snuck them past the anti figurative painting police.
Please. um Gottfried Heinwell, or I'm pronouncing his name wrong probably, but you know him. How did he fit into
Yeah,
that?
Hemlein.
Heinwell,
Um,
thank you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Also very interesting figure, because he was actually one of my art heroes when I was young, and he used to start off as an illustrator. He was doing these really amazing caricatures as well, if I remember right.
Mm.
And but he's only like very recently that he's being exhibited in Germany, and that his work is being shown. Like I haven't seen like
Okay.
it's strange, because like I loved his books when I was much younger, and now I'm surprised to see that he's actually being shown and his work is being put into big exhibitions.
Yeah,
But I
because
think
he's
he
doing
was pretty much not there for a long time.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, I only know him from the like super photorealistic, huge paintings that he does. I
Yeah,
didn't know that, but I know he's been gone for a long time. He lives in Ireland now, apparently.
yeah, does he?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
probably for tax reasons, no?
Uh, I'd be surprised. It's not that favourable to artists.
Really?
Garang,
Is that
pardon?
just a? never mind. So, like, there's this rumor that artists don't pay any taxes in Ireland.
Yeah, no, that's a rumor. Yeah. They
Yeah.
it used to be. That used to be the case. Now it's then it was like up to a certain amount. I think it started off as like completely, yeah, everything you earn is free. Then it was like, okay, up to 100 grand. Then it's like 75. I think it's at 50 now. So
Okay.
anything above 50, you get taxed like everybody else. Yeah, no, I think Gerhard, no, not Gerhard, Gottfried. He's bought himself
Mm,
he bought a castle in Kilkenny. I think like 15, 20 years ago. He's been there for a long time. Um,
really?
yeah, yeah, like when Marilyn
Sounds.
Manson married Dita Von Teese, they got married in his castle in
Yeah.
Kildare or Kilkenny or wherever it is.
Mm.
Um, Gurang Sivd in on Instagram says, "What has been the idea which is most dear to you, a theme which is reoccurring in your work?"
Whew, um, I mean, my theme is really what always reappears is that I'm very interested in humans and finding out how they tick and why how they work and why they do things. Um, and I'm always looking for those experiences that are at the same time universal and very individual. And that might sound like a contradiction, but I think there's quite a few of them. Like for example, like the easiest example is like when you, for the first time in your life, you fall in love, right? And it's such an amazing feeling. And then you get your heart broken. You know, parents tell you like, "Oh yeah, like there's plenty more fish in the sea. It's all gonna be good. You're gonna be fine again." But the pain is so acute, right? Like that, and so your own that you can't believe that your parents can relate and they've experienced it, right? And if somebody tells you beforehand about that experience, like it doesn't, like you can't really fully relate to it until you've experienced it yourself. And I think those are for me like very interesting experiences that I like to look for
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
do paintings about.
That's brilliant. Yeah, it's so true as well. Um, what's the main thing you learned from teaching?
Oh, that painting is so damn hard, it seems. I think um, that's really one of the main takeaways, and that it takes a lot of patience and a lot of hard work to get the hang of it. Um, and I mean, one thing that I love about teaching is kind of going in your head or trying to work your way into somebody else's mind and try to figure out what might help them at that moment, at that point where they are in their
Mm.
development of becoming a painter, which is very fascinating and a very difficult thing. But it's um, if it does work, it's immensely gratifying when you see you could actually help somebody, and because sometimes it's just little very little things that keeps people from making big steps, where they stand in their own way.
Yeah, can you give us an example of that? What you mean by that?
So I can give a good example from my own experience when I was going to art school. So there was this one art teacher who was always talking about doing the lines around the form, go around the form. Like I remember at the time when he was telling me about that, like I didn't understand what the hell he meant. Like, what do you mean lines around the form? Until about a year later or so, was sitting and drawing, and I realized, oh yeah, man, like I'm doing exactly, that's what he meant. Like I'm doing exactly that. Um, and to me, that is one of the most valuable lessons that I got, that really got me thinking around forms, and that made me think that a line continues where we don't see it. Right? It's not like an outline that goes around something, but it's a line that goes into space and out of space the entire time as it also moves up and down the page.
Yeah.
So now I'm when I'm drawing, like I'm thinking like I can move my hand into the page as well, like really moving three-dimensionally, which is a really fun experience.
Oh, yeah, that's brilliant. Very good. Thomas Wharton again says, judging from social media posts, you have a very disciplined studio practice with a large, high quality output of work. What do you do to balance the intensity of this work?
I make a little music. I read a lot. I've got a family and a wife who is keeps me from going too insane in the studio and too crazy about self-discipline, because I do tend to get very, very anal about self-discipline stuff. So yeah, like it's mainly thanks to my wife that I'm not completely um, insane person without social contacts.
And what do you play a few different instruments or just one?
No, I just play the guitar because I'm one of those people who, like, if I decide I want to do something, I have to kind of do it full blast. So be able to put the time into two instruments. I'm just trying to around on the guitar a bit.
Okay. Um, so you've talked about your family a bit. How have you balanced like the practicality of parenting and being an artist?
So I think that is one of the hardest things ever. But I think it's for all parents a hard balance. Finding the time for the family and finding the time to do the things that you need to do and want to do. It is it's on a day-to-day basis, and I think it just involves always feeling guilty to a certain degree. So like
Mm.
when I'm in the studio, I'm feeling guilty because I feel I'm neglecting my family, and when I'm with my family, I'm feeling guilty because I feel I'm neglecting my artist practice.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, that's just how things go, and nothing much you can do about it.
Yeah.
But it's
It's a
both are really rewarding, and you want to have it both, right?
yeah. Well, when I have a woman artist on who people know that they have kids as well, this question always comes up, and it's always like, how do you balance motherhood and being a painter? And when I have a man come on, I never get this question sent in, it's so that's why I'm asking you. Like, so how did you handle the childcare? Like, who does your wife? Did your wife do it? Did you do it together? How did you do it?
Well, I mean, it is interesting, right? Like that like, this question wouldn't come with a male artist, and that
Hmm.
the art world is still a very traditional place, right? Like where the crazy genius artist who, I mean, I think why the question comes, especially with women artists who do have families, is that even with male artists, you're not supposed to be having a family in the art world. I think it's like one of those places and jobs where people assume, okay, like you should be dedicating all your time to your art. Like, what are you doing having a family? right? So I think the
Should
concept
be
of having a
suffering.
family is, yeah, yeah, no, I mean, think about all the myth about the great artists that we admire, right? Like Van Gogh or oh man, like I'm getting tired now. I'm spacing completely on names. Chappie who painted the screen. Help me out there.
Um,
Norwegian. Oh,
Munch,
exactly,
Munch.
right? Like who, like he celebrated the whole thing. Like apparently, like he had like this woman that would have married him anytime, and he always told her like, "Oh yeah, like I can't marry you because like that would hinder my creative freedom. So like we can't get married. No way, no way, no way." And then she would leave him for a little while, and he would be like, "Oh no, my heart is broken. I can't take it anymore." That kind of thing, right? Like so, it's kind of like we celebrate that everything and all for the arts, or you know, I mean, Thomas Mann, like the most famous German author, he really had like his working office in the house, and the children, they knew when he was in the office, there was no way on earth, even if the house burned down or one of them would cut off their arm, you wouldn't disturb dad in the writing office. Not happening ever. And so
Quite
I
right
think it's,
too.
yeah, damn right. Yeah, yeah. So good disciplined. Um, yeah, so I think it's this. It goes along with of what artistic creation is like and what it should be like. Yeah, I think it's this where family is not planned in, and I've got a couple of friends of mine who both are artists, and they've shared the load pretty equally, and I always admire that, like how they did that. And in my case, I'm very lucky that my wife did actually do most of the childcare because she quit her job before we met. So I'm by default it fell into the traditional roles of me being the painter in the studio and she doing most of the child.
Right. How many kids do you have?
Two.
Two. Okay. Very good. Are you still doing
Yeah.
a self portrait every year?
I think I missed the one last year. I think I messed up there. Forgot to do the one last year.
Okay. Did you keep them all or did you sell them?
No, I sold them and they're all over the place. But I had them for like a show a few years back, like an institutional show. I pulled all the ones that I could together again,
All
which was
right.
pretty fun because
Yeah.
they're really, really very different.
Yeah, I can imagine. Elizabeth Holzel in Germany says, do you think an artist can find answers to the questions of his life through his medium, canvas, writing, singing, etc.?
No, I don't think you can. Like I think because I'm not sure that there are answers. I think what painting, writing, singing can do is that you it makes dealing with the fact that you realize that you don't find the answers easier.
That's a great answer. How have you found, because you are in a kind of, um, like a lot of the artists I talk to, they're very much within the figurative world, but it's like you have um, gone into the broader kind of contemporary art world. How have you found that? How have you found dealing with the art business, the business side of it? Comes up a lot on the podcast. So I'm just curious how you've found it.
Um, well, I think it's a necessary evil. It's, I mean, without taking care of the business side and doing that as well, like there's no way you can you can do your studio practice. So it's something you have to do, and sometimes it can be fun too, but yeah, it's something really that you need to do to be doing the things that you really want to do.
Have you been strategic about it? Like, have you planned, okay, I'm going to go from this gallery to this gallery, and then I want to be in this kind of show and this kind of thing, or just has it just happened organically?
You know what? Like with like I'm not like, and I know that about myself. I'm not a very good networker, and I'm not a very good salesperson, and that including selling myself to galleries. And then my work doesn't lend itself to being the work that you easily place here and there with any gallery that you like, because it's not necessarily easily sellable work, and it tends to be shifting, it tends to be changing, it doesn't stay constant enough. It doesn't have a lot of the qualities that big galleries look for,
Right.
including partly the prices, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
galleries also decide on which artists they take just if on the fact that they bring in enough income,
Yeah.
or
What
their
sort of
work brings
prices
in
are,
enough income.
yeah, what sort of prices are your paintings selling for these days?
And depends on the size, of course. The smaller ones like around 5,000, and then the larger formats like somewhere around 20,000.
Okay. Because you paint big, like, don't you? When you say larger, like, just to
Yeah, I
give
mean,
give
like
people an idea of what you mean by big.
that's like the size is like 2 meters by meter 20 or something like that, about that size.
Okay, yeah. But some of your work is like much bigger than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's much bigger. Yeah, and would be then accordingly more expensive.
Yeah,
Um, but then those are obviously also much harder to sell.
to sell. Yeah,
Um, just also based on the fact that a lot of people don't necessarily have the space to hang them, right? So
yeah, yeah. Do you have a big art dream you'd like to achieve before you die?
no, not really, not really. I mean, it's no, I don't think I do.
Okay, good.
I
You're
mean,
living the dream.
no. I mean, like, it's not that I don't have the dreams, but like, in a way, I've come to the point thinking, I mean, like I have the dreams like anybody else, and like, just as a joke, but like if I got offered like a retrospective at the moment, like I wouldn't say no, right? Like, but it's nothing that I really depend upon or throw my heart upon all that much, because in the end, I'm if you I oftentimes try to put things into perspective by asking myself, okay, like what would be the things that you remember when you're lying on your deathbed and you kind of know this is your hour has come to go. I don't think it's gonna be, oh yeah, like I remember like back in 2021, I painted this painting that was just amazing. That was genius. Or, it was like this opening where like so many people went, right? Like I don't think that will matter. I think those really are the moments where you remember, beautiful times you had with friends, or some experience in nature, or you know, seeing your children graduating from school, or stuff like that. Like I really don't think that painting is going to be the first thing that you'd be thinking about.
Yeah, that's lovely. Lovely. This is my last question. I'll ask this to everyone who comes on the podcast. If there's one thing you could pass on to future generations, what would it be?
Like a kernel of wisdom, or Anything.
Anything.
Don't use black on your palette.
Okay. Anything else?
Um, yeah, I think what would it
So I'm
be?
just thinking, I'm just imagining you in your deathbed, like everyone is like listening, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Don't use black on your palette," and then that's it, you're gone.
But I think that would be such a good piece of advice. All these people would be going away and they'd be much happier painters. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Um, yeah, possibly. I think the yeah. I think I know what it would be to know when enough is enough, and I mean that in every respect. I think that's a super important thing to keep in mind. Like in the respect of perfectionism, you know, because perfection can't be achieved. So why killing yourself to achieve something that you will never get? And in all kinds of other respects, be it money, be it fame, be it recognition, be it followers on Instagram, sometimes you just have to let enough be enough.
yeah, that's lovely. That's beautiful. Um, okay, well, it's been lovely chatting with you. I think your painting is fantastic. It's very inspiring. Um, you, yeah, you managed to convey all the things that you were saying that you hoped to convey. There is that recognition. Your paintings do, in a way, remind me of Tom Waits in that I recognize them, even though there's also a feeling of there's an alien, I don't mean from space. I mean I'm
Mm.
slightly alienated and familiar at the same time, and I feel for the people in the paintings, and I feel for myself at the same time, in the recognition of the common, thread. It starts off
Yeah.
with, oh, that poor person, oh, yeah, but actually I can really relate to that. I've been there. Oh, poor me as well. Technically, I find them really explosive, meaning they kind of blow my mind I mean that as if I just invented that phrase, meaning they expand, like just looking at them going, like what I was saying about the heads, it would never occur to
Mm.
me to kind of just chop everyone's head off or chop a lot of people's head off or frame things in that way or compose things in that way. So they're very, I find them very expansive as an artist, looking at them going, yeah, you can do that. You can just leave that that way, or you can bend that thing. And the idea of just doing things from your imagination only, that's so expansive. Like I from like when I was getting ready to have the chat with you and sort of seeing that that's the way you worked, and then listening to you talking about it, the way when you're talking to somebody and you can feel something changing inside you, like you're not going to be the same after this. I know I'm not going to paint the same after coming across that idea. I'm not saying, oh, that's it now, no more reference material for me. I don't mean that. I mean, maybe that would happen, but I don't think so. But just, um, it's happened a few times when I've talked to people on the podcast where I kind of come away going, yeah, that's it. Now I'm different. I know I've changed as a result of that. So I think that's happened to me a lot to do with your painting and the way you go about it. It seems so just, individual to you that in a way makes me feel, gives me permission, even though I didn't think I needed permission, to be, more individual to me. So, and I'd say I'm not alone in that. I mean, you're very popular among painters. Like when I said, you're going to be on, there was, well, you heard all the questions. I mean, I didn't get to all the questions. There were so many questions came in for you. So yeah, and it's lovely to chat to you, get to know you a bit behind the scenes, where you're coming from with it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like it was a great pleasure, and thank you for the kind words. I mean, that's really the highest form of praise coming from a fellow painter, and I really mean that. I think praise from other painters is always the one that means the most. And yeah, like if the work feels expansive to others, thank you. It's amazing. So thanks for having me on. It was a great pleasure. It was great meeting you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, well, I keep in touch with everybody, so I'm sure we'll keep in touch. Zoom, tea, or coffee. But yeah, we'll say goodbye for now.
Great. Thanks. Goodbye, John.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.
I've never felt this good in my entire life. Make me some spaghetti.
Actually, I'd prefer a cup of tea. A cup of tea would be lovely. So yeah, just a little reminder, mainly because every second or third person who becomes a patron has got in touch with me and said, you know what, I've been listening to your podcast for ages and I didn't become a patron, not because I don't have the money, not because I don't think it's great, I just didn't get around to it. So this is a little friendly reminder that if you'd like to be a patron, you'd like to buy me a cup of tea, go to patreon.com/John Dalton, gently does it, all one word, or follow the link in the show notes to become a patron. I would really appreciate it if you could do that, particularly if you've been meaning to and you just haven't got around to it. It would be great. It would mean a lot to me. All right, thank you. Bye.
We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. We're better than you thought, but not as good as we think. We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. Come on, buy us a drink. Come on, buy us a drink. We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. We're better than you thought, but not as good as we think. We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. Come on.